I believe that children are a great source of self-realization, right? Because I also recognize that I wanted them to see who I really am. And I didn't want them to grow up with a version of me that wasn't my greatest potential.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Sophie, and hello, everybody.
Hello.
And hello, Kristen. I wanted to share how happy I am that you were able to join us today, and recall that you are a new friend of mine, but I do already feel as though I've known you for several generations. And one of the things that I'm very excited about is your entrepreneuring while being a mother of young children. And creating a new way of publishing and a new way of sharing how we write and how we express ourselves. And so one of the things I'm really excited to talk to you about is how you balance all of that, because I know it's a daily, like dogs coming in and out and kids getting sick, and and having your own creative juice, your own creative path that you're following. And it seems like a lot of it must be a lot of juggling. And so those are some of the things that I've thought of, but I just appreciate your energy and how you're able to hold like a deck of cards and focus on this and focus and put that down, and but manage all of that. And so just starting with a acknowledgement of your bandwidth.
Oh, well, thank you. I think I use the term manage very loosely here, but it is, I manage about as well as an elephant herder on a vast plain. But no, I think it's first of all, I'm so thrilled to be here. And Katie, I just adore you, both from afar and up close. And I know we share a beautiful mutual friend, Jennifer Pasteloff, which I think is, any good friend of Jen's, it does create that sense of we've known each other for generations, right? Because there's just a shared DNA in those friendships of who we are as people and as women and as mothers and all of those pieces. And Sophie, it's so lovely to meet you. And I shared my horrible French with Sophie within the first few minutes of meeting her. So now we go back generations as well. So
Established we are French. Actually, Jen, it's funny because Jen was in Paris, Katie, if you remember, and you connected us, and we didn't end up seeing each other, but she was having the wildest experience in Paris, and I was following her actual adventure. It was really funny to reconnect with her that way. And France is such a country of non-entrepreneurial kind of. So I'm interested to also compare notes on how America, for me, I've lived here for 30 years, how it's become such a growth opportunities that doesn't really happen in France. So I'm kind of curious to how, what were you helped, how was your process as you were discovering your entrepreneurial debuts?
Yeah, I mean, I will say I'm also a new entrepreneur. So I think, I've learned, I've also gone from this place of, so I began my career in book publishing in a very traditional 9 to 5. I was working in editorial as an associate editor, and then as an editor. And then I left actually and went into the world of nonprofits for a few years, where I also was very much in a stable 9 to 5 job. But in between those jobs, I would always do freelance work because I was a writer and an editor. And like anybody who writes, you always take on side gigs. And so, I had plenty of those and had created a bit of a freelance business. But starting my own company has been a very different experience. And I also did those jobs when I was, without children. And so I think, it was sort of like easy and not, it was like you pick up a gig here, you pick up a gig there, but we lived in the east side of LA at the time when Silver Lake was cheap. when you paid $700 a month for rent. And so,
That was
so
a
it was a
while
lot
ago.
easier.
No,
Yeah, it
yes.
was a while ago. A lot easier to maintain a freelance lifestyle with very little responsibilities. And so I, like many other people in 2020, I'd been in a day job, actually, in nonprofits for many years. And I had been book coaching and ghostwriting books at night. It was just sort of my like side hustle, as they call it. And, it was just a way to bring in extra income because I did live in LA at that time, and even a full-time job didn't cover the bills. And so my husband works in drug and alcohol counseling, which I think they pay better now. But back then he got paid like $20 an hour, which is wild, for the work he has. He's a drug and alcohol counselor. But so he was doing that. And, and it really got me back, though, into books, into helping people write their stories. And so when 2020 happened, there was just this great opportunity to really turn it into a company and begin to help both amateur and established writers. And that's what I love. I mean, I work with people like Jen Pasteloff. Like, I work with people who have multiple books. I have clients who have New York Times bestsellers. I work with established writers, but I also work with folks who have never published a thing in their lives. And so I really loved getting to do both. And for many years prior to opening my own business, I had always primarily worked with established writers. So, or folks who had like a show on the OWN network or a Bravo show, right? So I would get hired because they had some TV thing. And so, but really getting to work with folks who've just only considered writing a hobby and who are now really seriously considering, like, what does it look like for me to write a book? So, so that really changed everything. And it's my favorite part of the job, and it really made it good. It's what pushed me out of like side hustle into entrepreneur. So, which, is challenging. I mean, I've really, running a business, I have staff, I have all those pieces, right? And then I opened a book publishing house, which is a whole next level because, and my husband has a pizza restaurant. And I always say, like, running an online or a digital business is one thing, but as soon as you are selling a product, it just becomes a completely different world.
Welcome to the new feature of Zoom, which randomly throws balloons in the middle of your feed.
You cannot get rid of it either, just so everybody knows. I have tried to get rid of mine so many times. I untab that thing and it does not matter. It's just the ghost in the machine and it has its own mind. So
I think it's related. It's related to, like, you just said the word celebration, or you just said happy birthday, comes the balloon. No, it's completely, and then the thumbs up, it's completely unrelated. It's
completely random. No, it's completely
actually
random.
Quite wonderful, because don't we just need celebration pauses? Like, oh, here we are together, and the lightness of balloons. That's one of the things I love about balloons, and I actually use them in exercises to create that sense of we can play together in the same way that we would play with balloons. So I'm just celebrating that's
probably manifested the balloon.
Probably. But I'm just noticing that you have a book sitting right beside you on this table.
I do.
And yes. I think it has something to do with you, doesn't it? That book sitting there?
It sure does. Yeah. So I'm not only crazy enough to run my own company, I'm also crazy enough to still write books on the side. So this is I wrote my first book in 2010 called 5150, which was a bestseller and did sort of all the things you wanted a book to do. And then I spent about, many years ghostwriting other people's books. So I ghostwrote around 24 books over like a 6-year period, which was fairly intense. It was, some years had more books in them, oddly enough. But it really took me away from my own writing. And so I finally, in 2016, started writing again. And I wrote this novel, Live Through This. And much like my own clients, like, I went through the whole process of trying to get a book agent, and that took years, quite frankly. I mean, I took a lot of breaks in that. I actually had my second child in the middle of that agent search. So there was a big swath of time in which I wasn't actively doing anything on the book. But, finally in 2020, I got an agent. And then in 2021, we were taking it out to publishers just as I was beginning to build my own publishing house, Rise Books. And one of my other authors said, why don't you just publish Live Through This? Which I sort of joke now. I'm like, I don't know if it was the best idea because I am not actually a very good self-publisher. I am a great promoter of other people's works. But promoting my own works is really hard. And then doing that as both author and publisher is just a really complicated process. So I've just had to really, I've had to learn, you learn what you're good at and you learn what you're not good at, and that's part of life. But I'm very proud of the book. And it's, it also came out on October 10th, which was a very hard time for any kind of promotion. It was, obviously 3 days after October 7th and the months that have ensued. And so it was just really like, I just feel like finally in this new year, like I'm getting around to finally feeling comfortable about being like, hey, read my book. So even though it is a lot about activism and standing up for what you believe in and, and really coming into your own, not just as like a woman or a professional, or it's a very American book, or as an American, but like as a human, and how can one person try to change things in this world when it feels like, as much as we write letters or protest or send postcards or make phone calls to senators, like our will is never done, and so it's really a book about really standing in one's own individual power. So, which is, not an easy thing to do, just even in our own personal lives.
You said something in there that was really relevant to a conversation Katie and I have been having for a while, which is that you shared that it was easier for you to promote. You're really good at promoting others, not as easy to promote ourselves, which I see Katie's also shaking her head. It's like, I find that as a woman, I find that to be true. And I run into a lot of women which will give so much and do so much for their friends and lift the cars and whatever those stories of, mama bears we've heard so often. But when it comes to like asking for our own benefit, it really is difficult. I'm curious, like even Katie, like what's with that? Like what's going on?
Well, I was also just recalling when we published Conscious Loving, and we were all set to go on a bunch of shows. This was before the internet or anything, back in New York. And then the first Iraq War broke out. And that was it. We just got wiped off the map. And so then the next year was when we had the opportunity. That's when we went on Oprah. So if we had actually, the circumstances, if we'd had it work the year before, who knows what would have occurred, So we went from, 6 couples in our living room to 10 million people on Oprah. And my sense is too that what you can't take account of is the timing of everything going on in the world. But what's really that focusing on here I am, that letting yourself be visible, promoting something for you is something that we're not trained to do. In fact, we're trained to do the opposite, of promote everybody else and kind of be in the background. So you're moving from ghostwriter to, to author and publisher is a huge move. And I was just wondering what were, one or two of the central moves or the central shifts that have made that possible for you to really, move through that, it's not about me, it's about everybody else that you're trained to do.
Yeah, I think, I think obviously pain is a good motivator, right? I think
yes, that can work. Yeah.
I think it's I still don't know if it is actually Proust. I've tried to find this a number of times, but there's a great quote, to hope we make promises, but to pain we obey. And so I think that in my own personal career, I kept ending up in sort of the shadows of other people. And not just, ghostwriting. I will say, and I love some of the books I ghost wrote. I didn't love others as much. They were just a job. And it was I have a dear friend whose father has been a very big ghostwriter throughout the years. And he said, you ghostwrite so you can buy a house. And it's like, that's why people, truly, and there might be some people who truly love ghostwriting, but the bulk of people do it because it's very lucrative, And so, so in that, it really, I will say that's what I was doing. I mean, I knew I had to pay the bills. And then at a certain point, I realized, hey, I can do this on the side. But then I ended up in a bunch of different professional relationships where I kind of kept being the right-hand man to somebody else, even though I had the experience, I had the knowledge, I even had the contacts, like I had all the things. And yet this other person was sort of getting to be the face of the operation. And so that was really like, it was kind of like a thing where, when it happens one time, you're like, oh, that's fine. But when it starts happening consistently, you're like, no, I'm doing, and I wasn't happy with that. Some people are perfectly fine to be a right-hand man. I'm not, there's no judgment there. I mean, we all find our place in the world, but I wasn't happy doing it. And so, so I just really, it was this place where, and I think for a lot of us, pandemic kind of gave me the freedom and the emotional space to say like, hey, I don't want to do that anymore. And I keep ending up in these same relationships and I keep ending up in these same professional environments. And it's not making me feel good, and yet I'm coming to the space with all of this. And I have to really look at why am I not standing in my own worth, in this.
And so what did you learn? How did you shift that so that you actually are standing in your own worth? I have my own story about that, about learning to do that with Gay, who's this, giant presence.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious about how you moved from sort of, background to foreground of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, sometimes gracefully, sometimes not. Say it's a little bit like, I think that's part of being an entrepreneur though, right? I mean, really like leading your own business, whether it's whatever that business is, whether it's book coaching or writing a book. I mean, it's really like, I am the face of the thing I am doing. And you're usually not going to have that in a corporate enterprise unless you're like Bob Iger, right? I mean, you usually are a fairly faceless individual in a larger business. And so when you're founder, I mean that, and yeah, I mean, I've had to navigate people not liking me, right? I mean, that's the thing. When you're in front, you take all the first arrows, like, which at first I was like, what? Like I've explained to people, I'm like, that's not, like, I'm kind of like a stoner. Like, I'm not really somebody who gets into the drama of things. Like, I was never into like high school girl drama. Like, I've always kind of just like I'm cool. Like, I don't really, and I've discovered like navigating that, because once you're the face of something, you're really like, you're so vulnerable to everything. But I think for me, it really was just this shift of, I had to really stand in, I know what I'm good at. I'm tired of feeling resentful. And I also feel like I'm tired of feeling like I'm being used. And maybe that's me putting myself in situations where I'm being used, right? Or maybe I'm also slightly being exploited by others too. I mean, there's always a dance in that. And then I quite famously sort of quit. I had a day job and then I had a night job ghostwriting books for a hybrid publisher. And I quit both of those jobs on May 4th of 2020. I joked like, may the 4th be with me. And and I really did. I was just like, and I bought this painting behind me. Literally, like when I launched the business, I bought myself a rich lady painting. And I just said, like, it's time for me to, and I think having children has been a huge part of that. I will say I might have to mute myself for a second only to give direction to a child for 1 sec. But because I'm doing this all with children, right? But I do think having kids, I believe that children are a great source of self-realization, right? Because I also recognize that I wanted them to see who I really am. And I didn't want them to grow up with a version of me that wasn't my greatest potential, right? And not that, I mean, that shows up in how I'm going to treat them. That shows up in how I'm going to live my life. But also it's going to show up in just that secure attachment, right? Like, if I'm not firm in who I am and I'm making choices based out of integrity and authenticity, like how can they trust me as their guide? And so I know that, like, I think especially when Dylan was born and I sort of recognized like, I mean, having two was very transformative for me. I felt like, and also it was like a break. I was, I'm an only child with a single mother. So, so being in this place where then I had like a little squad, like I was like, I gotta take care of the squad. But I also like, I just didn't want to give them a life where like I couldn't be there for them. Where I was, dropping them off at 8:30 and picking them up at 5:30 and then working at night. I wanted to really be present for them. I wanted to be like, hey, you could stay home from school even though mommy has meetings. Like I want to, I mean, even this morning I was having like a bit of a kerfluffle because I knew I had this, right? And I was like, oh my God, balance. And I was like, I just always stop and say to myself, like, they're the only thing that matters. Like truly, like at the end of the day, like they're the only thing that matters. And if I let anything else matter more, like it's going to make me be terrible at both jobs. Cause then I get resentful at everybody, right? Then you get angry, like I'm angry at the job and I'm angry at the kids, And so, yeah, I just think I hit this place where I was tired of not being me and knowing it, and really, and then that's what they're watching.
Well, what I'm hearing this among many of the things that you're sharing is that you have your children as your is like your tent pole or your anchor, and so it's a very easy way to center yourself and also to make choices. So, because you're like on a merry-go-round all the time.
Yeah.
And so what am I going to reach for? Am I going to reach for the coin now, or am I going to focus on, keeping the merry-go-round working? But when you have something that you have is really your centering choice, I'm imagining that makes other choices easier for you.
It does. No, it does. I mean, yes. And it also can always add that, well, what's best for them too, right? I mean, I've had a lot of questions and challenges in my marriage recently where like, yeah, I mean, if it was what's best for me, it would be to go, right? I mean, that's very honest. Like, I know that would be best for me. I know that 100% it would be best for me. I don't know that 100% for them. And so I do think there's places where the tent pole, though it's there, sometimes it doesn't always show me the easier path. And even now, like, I mean, my business has struggled over the last year because I think like a lot of people in the digital economy, we had this false boom in pandemic. People were home. They were buying courses online. They were joining writers' workshops. They were in this, especially for people in the creative industry like myself. And I work with a lot of people in anti-racism. That's a lot of my clients. And so they've seen a similar, like, oh my God, because there was so much attention paid to their work in 2020 and 2021. And then in 2022, everybody went back to life, right? And so both the commitment to social justice or the commitment to sourdough bread making, it all kind of crashed. And so, I've been navigating that both professionally and financially and like, how do I maintain this business? And not end up back in a 9-to-5 job, which there's nothing wrong with that, but I know that's just not who I am. That's not my happiest space. Right. And so I do think it's always, I think it's always like a game of Tetris, right? Like you're always just trying to fit those pieces in, and sometimes they don't match up, and sometimes you feel like you're running out of time, and and just really navigating it. But I do feel that in that sense, like even as the Tetris blocks are aligning or not aligning, I do try to remember that, like, are they happy? Are they healthy? Are they kind? Am I happy? Am I healthy? Am I kind? And, and the rest of it, the like, oh my God, how are we going to pay this? Or, oh my God, this person's mad at me. Or, oh my God, what am I doing here? It's not as loud as it can otherwise feel.
I just thought of something else just popped in, which I heard you alluding to, is how free women are, how free we are from an attachment to people's approval or disapproval. I think that especially as an entrepreneur or, the face of your business, you're getting, the pies thrown at you as well as the accolades, and how you navigate that emotionally of, oh, that person just really doesn't like me. Now what? Now what do I do?
Yeah.
I'm not going to change me, or maybe I should change me. So I imagine that what you're touching on, I think, is something that many, many women share, is that we're looking for our validation from other people. And so it sounds like one of the moves that you're in the midst of making is really owning your own value and then building that so that you can really rely on that attitude towards yourself.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's also just coming to a place of acceptance that not everybody has to like you, or not, or, it's not even like, I mean, I just think it's also like, not everybody has to agree with you, and that's okay. I mean, I've had a really painful thing with one of our authors at Rise Books where she got mad on something, and I just, I conceded a lot. I had been in the, make everybody happy game, and it ended up kind of costing us too much money because I had conceded so much, and I finally was done conceding, and she wanted to push through that, and I went and I finally was holding the line, and we had been friends, destroyed the friendship, destroyed the professional relationship, destroyed the book. I mean, it was really quite sad. And but I also felt like, I have a business to run, and I have to be a steward of a budget. And it does, at a certain point, you can't make everybody happy, to risk to everybody else, I mean, it really, and so, you're not the only author, sort of thing. But it was hard because there is a part of me that always wants to concede, because I want to make people happy. I want them to have a good experience. And it's really easy to then be like, oh my God, am I wrong? And, and it's even hard when you go to all your friends and they say you're right, because, friends kind of have a tendency to always agree with you, even when you're like, no, be hard. I want the cold truth, but, so, and just really like having to realize, like, again, as a new entrepreneur, as a new business owner, that is part of doing business. I can be generous in a lot of areas, but not to my own, not at my own risk, and certainly not at the risk of others, and so there's a space where and you do realize, like, okay, like, how do I set boundary? I mean, really it is, right? How do I create boundaries? And then, I feel it even, it's almost like you feel like your rib cage like sewing itself back together a little bit, because you can feel so like blown apart like by these things, and then you begin to realize, okay, I'm creating something more solid though every time, because this is what entrepreneurship is. It is what creativity is, right? I mean, it's all based on rejection, revision, next step, and so you just kind of move forward with like, okay, rejected, that version of whatever we were doing there didn't work, revise for the next time, and you go back out, and each time, I feel that as much as it was terrible and sad and stressful, it is now, I find also, even when I get the email again about something else on it, like I don't find that, neurological zing that we all get, right? That like that amygdala, like, so.
What I'm hearing too is that I think we can all use is that you're learning new ways to say no. Mm-hmm. Like, no, this doesn't work for me. This is the direction I'm going. And I was also reminded of one of the things that Pema Chodron has said, which is things fall apart. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Things fall apart and then they come together, and things fall apart and they come together. And somehow I think in our culture, women are supposed to be we keep things from falling apart and we keep things on track, and, we're the social glue. And so allowing for things to fall apart and to come back together. And what you learn from that sounds like it's really allowed you to grow your nervous system in some really vital ways.
You're saying women, Katie. I'm kind of interested in, don't you think men are also trained to be put together and don't cry and don't show your vulnerability and as well? Like,
I think maybe even more, but I think men are trained to be able to say no. In fact, that's that's what you do, is that you say no and you make the rules for everybody else. So part of taking your place as an equal in a gender sense, I think for us means that we need to be able to be harder to be able to say no. And men are learning how to be softer and more vulnerable and letting themselves be affected. So I think, of course, it's a universal issue, but I do think that that women are acculturated much more to be the accommodators.
Interesting.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's the same. I mean, I think it's the same way that we're not good at promoting ourselves, right? Like, I think there's always like, because we are, and it's so funny because I always grew up, like, I would go to Thanksgiving with family that I very rarely saw except for like on Thanksgiving. And I grew up in a very small family. I was raised by my mom, my grandmother, my two uncles. So we didn't have like a gender, like everybody cooked, everybody did the dishes, everybody hung out. Like no one, like my uncle is the cook. So he's always in the kitchen. My other uncle, who passed away from COVID, he was gay. So he was the DJ. So he was like putting on, so he was like spinning Madonna in the living room, and like the football game was on mute. And then I would go and visit this other family, and all the men were in the living room watching the game, and all the women were in the kitchen cooking and cleaning, and like never the two should meet. And I refused to go in the kitchen. I would only sit in the living room, even though I do not like American football. And so I just feel like that has always been the dynamic though, right? Like we take care of it, we fix it, we say yes, we obligate. And they, and they're able to do what they want to do while being fed and served and cleaned. And even though I think there are so many men who work outside of that, I mean, again, I grew up in a family where that was not the case at all. I do think that we still have that piece of us that, I knew when I was sitting in that living room, like there was a part of me that was like, I think I'm supposed to be in the kitchen, right? Like, it was socially awkward for me to be there, because I knew my job was over there. And so I do think being able to say, like, I'm not going to do the dishes, I'm going to sit my butt down and watch TV. It is really hard for us to stand in that, to say no to the things and to really take up the space that we deserve,
This reminds me how I imagine life used to be. That when you were learning a profession as a child, you would just shadow your parents and you got to be included in everything that was going on because there wasn't a division of now you're a kid and you do kid things, but now you're in life and here we are all learning together. And I really like, even though it must be very chaotic at times and always something coming up and being, but it also sounds incredibly lively, contactful.
Like,
yeah.
Yep.
My 5-year-old went to the restroom and is screaming for somebody to wipe him. So that's actually what is going on right now.
Exactly.
So my daughter has now been sent to facilitate that effort, whatever that might look like. I pray for them both. But I'm like, you wipe yourself at school every day, Dylan. It's not a thing that you don't know how to do just because I'm somewhere nearby. So yeah, he's learning that women can say no. Although Ella is also learning that she gets to help. No, I mean, again, I'm not the only, my husband and I, we did not intend to be entrepreneurs at the same time. That was not in our vision board at all. It was a very just accidental twist of fate that everything sort of happened the way it did with him opening a pizza shop. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely, so keeps laughing. She's like, what? And then there's a pizza shop.
Same guy who's the drug and alcohol counselor? Same guy?
Yes.
So he does both.
Yeah.
You come for pizza and then you sit there and you deal with the other.
You get your process.
Ironically, a little bit. So prior to pandemic, he had been working in rehabs. And then he decided to start his own nonprofit called Athletes in Recovery, AIR, which he comes from the surf and skate community. There's obviously a lot of addiction issues in those communities. And so he had worked for years with the Grammy organization Music Cares that provides substance subsidies and scholarships to rehabs and sober livings. And so he wanted to create the same thing, but out of the surf and skate community. We built this like amazing board with a lot of pro skaters and surfers and people from Volcom. It was very exciting. We were going to have our first launch event in May of 2020. My husband opened up a sober living that was like attached to it. And then, we all know what happens next. And so he ran the sober living for about 2 years, but it was really difficult in pandemic. It just wasn't an easy thing to do. And so it was still running though. But we had built like we had all this marketing for AIR, like this, we had a logo, we had all the things, and so for athletes in recovery. And we had a dear friend who owns a pizza shop in LA. And we tried to get them to come up to Ojai to open up a pizza shop here. And they decided that they didn't want to because their investor wanted to open a pizza shop in San Marino. So the sort of last minute, they said, we can't do it, but we'll help you to do your own. And so we opened Air Pizza and we used all of our marketing and all of our logo stuff. And with the idea that one day we're actually working to bring back the nonprofit as well. And that the two will work in coordination together as part of like a larger kind of ideal. But Katie's had our pizza. I think she could attest. We magically created an amazing pizza. So it sort of still shocks us what ended up. Thumbs up. Even Zoom agrees. Zoom has had Air Pizza.
Like good pizza.
Really good pizza.
Very famous. So, yes, people go for it. I'm just so, with what you're saying, it's like, it's the best kind of 3-ring circus from the outside here. I don't know if you experienced it that way, but it sounds like there's just stuff going on all the time and a fountain of creativity. I mean, that's the thing that really strikes me is there's no lack of creativity and the expression of that and how to manage everything so that the kids don't get lost, and you're working from your own passions and your own creative impulses. But, it's very inspiring. If people could just plug in and get a little bit of that, of your creativity, I'm sure they'd be very happy. You could sell little creativity blocks, they could take you and get an infusion of creativity to meet life.
It is interesting to watch you, Kristen, because as it's happening, you're with us, you're sharing so incredibly authentically as it's going on. And you seem to have a really cool attitude about it. Like the energy you seem plugged is what it feels like. You seem like you're present here, you're present there. Like there's something very organic to that. And as we're wrapping up, I'd love to know, what do you do to take care of yourself in the midst, or are you taking care of yourself in the midst of all this? And if so, what are good tricks?
So I'll say I went through a period where I was not. I mean, I had last spring, it really hit like it was like, there were 6 months of it. I can't even say it was last spring. I think it started, it went for, it was like 9 months. It was like a pregnancy of pain. Yeah. Because everything the 3-ring circus just kind of all started falling in on each other. Air Pizza became very hard to run. Rise Books became hard to run. Children became hard to run. My husband was gone all the time. So I was also doing really felt like single parenting.
Yeah.
And so, I sort of, I've had a lot of moments of crying on the kitchen floor, in that, and just being like, oh my God, and also for my husband, like I've said, owning a restaurant is by far one of the most stressful jobs you can have. We don't watch The Bear because we don't need to, but ironically, we're friends with John Bernthal, whose character, commits suicide in that show, from the stress of running a restaurant and addiction issues. And it's funny because John loves Air Pizza. And I said, that level of stress, you understand. It's dangerous. It's very dangerous. And I felt like it did get dangerous for all of us. And then I had a book come out in October and I was on the road, and it felt, my 91-year-old grandmother actually moved here from Dallas in the spring to come help us. And as Katie knows, because I've been texting her about canes, about 3 months after, the arthritis in her knee went from okay to like immobile. And so I've been navigating that too. Like I do a lot of doctor's appointments. And so, yeah, so, I mean, it hit this like just fever pitch of like, there's no way, there's no way. And so I don't know. I mean, I did a few things just mechanically that I was like, okay, how can I moved books out of the Rise book schedule. I spread them out over 2 years as opposed to 1 year. So I was able to just create some space there that I didn't feel like, because that business doesn't make me any money right now. And so it was like, I can't do all this work for free. So I made some like actual mechanical decisions in the business, but I also just feel like I made, again, these decisions of like, how do I prioritize this? And how do I prioritize me? And I did do, I mean, one, I just started like working out again, which I have not worked. I'm not somebody who works out. Like when Jen heard that I was working, she was like, what, you don't work out? I was like, I know, but I think like I just knew. And then the wildest thing happened at the end of December was I took my daughter to like a horse camp over the holidays. And I used to ride all the time. I leased a horse in LA. I rode almost every morning. I was a horse girl as a kid, but I haven't ridden in 13 years really, other than like trail rides on vacation. And the owner of that stable said, so when are we going to get you back in the saddle? And I was like, yeah, not now, not now. And she goes, really? Because I have a horse for lease. And I was like, yeah, I'm not leasing a horse. And she goes, really? Because it's a thoroughbred named Malibu. And I was like, what?
Say what? She takes care of the horse as well.
Yeah. So I literally was like, the 12-year-old in me was like, Malibu. I'm on a horse named Malibu. So yeah, I now take care of the horse as well. But the difference is the horse takes care of me. And I just like, it's a very new thing. Like I literally am signing now the long-term lease. Like I texted with a woman today. We trialed it in February to see whether I could do it. I was like, I'm not going to put this in if it just becomes one more thing I have to do. But what I realized is it's 2 hours, 3 times a week and sometimes I bring my daughter. We love being there together. She just runs off and does her thing. She has little friends there she plays with, and it's great. Other times I just take me. There's no Wi-Fi. I mean, there is Wi-Fi, but I don't connect to their network. It's 2 hours where no one can find me.
Yeah.
And I get to just be with the horses in nature. It's at the end of Cañada Larga. There's nobody around. And it's just for me. And this beautiful, huge former racehorse that is like amazing and who has been absolutely like a blessing. And it just became this thing where it was like, I didn't have the extra money to buy tack. They gave it to me at like a really good rate. And like, so they had like a free saddle that just happened to fit me. Like, it was just one of those things, when the universe is just like green light, green light, green light, and you can't ignore it any more than you can ignore the red light, red light, red light. And so, and I do think like I've just seen in the last, since the holidays, I took a lot of time off to just sort of get that nervous system back. It really was like, okay, I just got to get this nervous system back. I got to not worry. Like if it's not a real deadline, it's not a real deadline. I'm not going to stress out about fake deadlines, and I'm not going to create urgency where there is no urgency. There are urgent things and there are unurgent things. And I'm going to be real clear about which one is which. And I am going to not stress out at kids when, and I also saw that too. Like everybody's home today and that's just what it was. And I was like, I'm not going to get mad at them for being, where they're at, right? Like, how dare you get sick, whatever. Like, you're going to be home, you're going to be in the background and we're going to move through it. And, and I do feel like, I felt like at one point I was doing it all with like, I was just kept adding things on my back. And I do feel like now instead I want to sort of hold hands and skip. And I know that doesn't mean I'm not going to like trip because that doesn't, I'm still going to trip from time to time and face plant. But I think I'll face plant a lot less if I'm not just like hunched over from it. And so I have felt a very different, it's funny. The economics are all the same. The circumstances all the same. The outsides are all the same. Right. It doesn't mean that like, and then I won the lottery.
We don't know that yet. I haven't won the lottery yet, but
we do still buy tickets, but my husband is committed. But I but I do think, but I do think if as long as there's more joy in the process, then that makes it a lot more worthwhile. And it does, I feel it, within my husband's business too, that, we finally got our first investor in that business in 2 years. Yay! In December, like, yay, somebody believes in us. And so, so I do think like those, you just begin to feel life soften a little bit more as you soften. So, and I think that is a big piece of it, is just, I think as women, like, we do get, even Katie, when you were talking, right? Like that masculine, feminine, it's actually easy for us to go masculine because then we know how to get hard, and we know how to be soft, but integrating that, I think, is such a huge piece of it, is like, I can do both, right? Like I can wipe butts, say no, hug people, create community, be creative, take care of a horse, and like, and still like run a business with financial impact, but it is about learning how to integrate that. And I think that's the one thing we are not taught, right? Like we're so taught this binary system. And so we always think we have to be one or the other, instead of realizing like two things can be true at the same time.
That sounds like a wonderful summary, doesn't it, Sophie?
Right. A good place. Exactly. That was beautiful. Thank you so much. What an inspiration. I want to go, I don't know, ride a horse, do something today. It was lovely. Katie, as always, thank you so much for being in these conversations and sharing with your heart. You're such a beautiful human. Thank you.
No, thank you. And thank you, Kristen, for sharing some of your life with us. It's been very inspiring.
Wonderful. And I would like to say, for anybody who's interested, please join us at Rise Writers. That's where we do, if you want the bottled creativity, that's what we try to do, is really inspire people to find the ways to tell their stories, and so we do it with online workshops, and we have a upcoming retreat in Ojai coming in April too. So I know.
So let's make sure we have the link to all this. We'll
definitely do that. Super.
Okay, great.
Thank you both.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much.